Okay, I think we're live. Okay, all right. What we're going to do today is kind of pick up where we left off on Monday, I think. So we left everybody with a cliffhanger. But first, I just want to kind of, make sure everybody's okay. And I just want to convey my sincere gratitude to everybody for just the outpouring of affection, of support, of patience. And, I know we're all going through a lot of the same things at the same time. And so, we're all definitely trying to help each other. And I see a lot of that. I was talking to somebody this morning about how much technology and things like social media have really come into their own through this whole process and this experience that we're all dealing with. The world has been getting to be a smaller place because of social media, and fortunately that at least helps in this regard, that we can at least stay connected through things like Facebook and Zoom and not feel completely isolated and alone through it throughout this process. So anyway, I just want to again just wish everybody well, and hope everybody's doing good and is staying healthy. And so with that, what I'm going to do is just kind of open it up for my father, Dr. Wallach, to talk about where we left off on Monday. And I left it kind of with a cliffhanger about a specific nutrient that's really, really critical. It's one of the 90 essential nutrients, it's one of the essential nutrients, it's a mineral, but it's also made up a lot of my father's research and his lifelong research, really. And he's one of the major worldwide contributors to the research, and one of our most popular products is our Ultimate Selenium. And the reason is because my father, Dr. Wallach, has really been at the forefront of educating people about the importance of selenium for, gosh, I'd say about 40 years. So with that, why don't you tell us all kind of where selenium became, reached your radar, I guess, as a essential nutrient, because back then it was really thought to be just a nuisance nutrient, not even nutrient. It was thought to be non-essential and really a contaminant of agriculture, I think. And so if you can kind of go back to the beginning where you first began to realize, maybe it was early, because of Dr. Albrecht, but I'm not even sure. I just kind of know from my perspective the cystic fibrosis research, but you must have known about selenium before that. So anyway, you can go back to the beginning and just kind of talk about selenium, fill everybody in, and I'll probably learn something along with everybody else on my father's knowledge and research on selenium. So I'll let you take it from there and just kind of give us a bit of a history lesson as to where selenium reached your radar first.
Well, thank you, Steve, and for everything that you and Michelle and the crew does, and I really appreciate that. And of course, the Youngevity family and their connections are all benefiting from our help and providing services and products and things like that. When it comes to selenium, I was very much aware of that as a farm kid, because the calves would die of what was called white muscle disease. They'd be born in a couple of days, they'd be dead. And essentially it was a type of muscular dystrophy and also hypertrophic cardiomyopathy heart disease. They were dying of selenium deficiency. And you could go into any feed store, back when I was a kid, 9, 10, 12 years old, you could go into a feed store where you bought grain to feed the animals and so forth. And you could buy antibiotics to inject them with, but if they had pneumonia. But you could also buy injectable selenium. When you had a calf with white muscle disease, which was muscular dystrophy, you would inject them with that selenium, they'd pop up and run around and be perfectly normal one day. And so I was aware of it. My first degree was in agriculture. My major was in animal husbandry and nutrition. My second major was in field crops and soils. Again, that had to do with the nutrients that were necessary to grow crops and to properly raise animals and so on. So I became more familiar with the selenium there. And I graduated in 1964 from the University of Missouri. I had my degree in agriculture, I had my degree in veterinary medicine. I was kind of halfway through my pathology degree. And I had already written in 1961, 3 years before I graduated, the first paper on mass die-off in America as a pathology student. Got that published because that was very exciting. I was already published by the time I was 21 years old in scientific journals. And of course, the story is in the book Epigenetics and Dead Doctors Don't Lie and so forth. Well, to make a long story short, I was going to finish up my pathology degree at Iowa State University. It was going to take 2 more years. And halfway into that 1 year, Marlon Perkins, my old mutual Kingdom show, asked me to go to Africa and work on the White Rhino Conservation Project. And you can't refuse Marlon Perkins. So I took that up, and he said, you know, it might take 2 years, it might take 5 years. There's only 470 left in the southern 1/3 of Africa, continent of Africa. And so to make a long story short, I cut half of them. I cut over 200, sent them back here. So if you see a white rhino in a zoo or wild animal park, it's either ones that I caught or ones that were born here. And 2 years into that, I'm prepared to stay in Africa forever. I'm having the time of my life, living out in the bush and dealing with hundreds of thousands of village people. I was really the only white guy out in the bush with all these Zulu and Matabele tribesmen, and they just treated me like family. It was wonderful. And Perkins sends me another letter and said, look, I just got a grant using your paper on the mass die-off from pollution to study deaths from pollution in zoo animals and deaths from pollution in people who lived around the zoos, so that we could use the zoos as canaries in the mine, kind of like the old coal miners used to do. When gases would leak into the mine 400 years ago, the canaries would die, they'd never get out. And so if animals in the zoo were dying from pollution, we needed to evacuate the city. So I came back for that. Spent 10 years onto that. And of course, zoo animals, all vertebrates, are susceptible to the same deficiencies. And so I'm seeing essentially white muscle disease in babies that are born in the zoos that are just being fed raw grains. Grains don't need selenium, but they suck it up. It's in the soil. And so it just depended on where the food came from, what zoos were where they were located and so forth. And after 10 years, okay, I had a postdoctoral fellowship in comparative pathology. I had done over 20,000 autopsies, 17,000 some change of over 454 species of zoo animals instead of 50 white rats, and 3,000 human beings. My thesis is in the Smithsonian Institute as a national treasure because I showed there were no genetically transmitted diseases and there's no genetically transmitted birth defects. I mean, that freaked everybody out, but it was unimpeachable evidence. And the animal piece of it became Disease of Exotic Animals, a big textbook for that. It's 5,000 pages. W.B. Saunders edited it down to 1,200 pages, plus 3,000 human autopsies, which was all published materials, and became the book Epigenetics because epigenetics replaced the science of genetics. Well, in 1977, 7 years, or actually 10 years, the project was 10 years, I got a job at Yerkes Primate Center in Atlanta, Georgia, with NASA and their colony for sending monkeys up to space and so forth, and also the Emory University and the medical school there, and being a pathologist both in the medical school at Emory University and also at the Yerkes Primate Center. I ran into the first non-human case of cystic fibrosis in one of the Yerkes baby monkeys. It was in a colony of 25 baby monkeys. They're all being prepped to go into space, and one dies, and it was classic cystic fibrosis. And so I sent copies of the slides off to experts in that. I didn't tell them it was a monkey. I didn't want anything to influence their judgment. And they said, this is a classic example. I had like 5 of them, 5 different universities, and agreed that this is a classic example of cystic fibrosis.
On the pathology of cystic fibrosis, from my layman's understanding from being around you and seeing some of those slides, is very telltale. It's very specific.
Yeah, very specific. And of course, there's 2 different things going on. One is in the pancreas and the liver, and the other one's in the lungs. There's 2 different deficiencies. One deficiency causes the lung disease, and the other deficiency, the selenium deficiency, causes the pancreatic and liver disease. And so you need both deficiencies to get a classic case of cystic fibrosis. And also, the one that causes the lung disease causes the positive test and so forth for cystic fibrosis. And to make a long story short, I got it all put together, got it ready for publication, which I had already done before in 1961. This is 1977. And I get it ready for publication. I hand it into the system at Emory University, Grady Memorial Hospital, which was the pathology part that I was dealing with. And I said, okay, and here's the papers from the experts saying this is cystic fibrosis in this monkey. And I had gotten permission to do biopsies on the livers of the other 24 baby monkeys. All of them had different mother fathers, so they weren't kind of like brothers and sisters. There were no relationship to each other than they were monkeys. And they all had cystic fibrosis, so I knew it was a colony diet problem as opposed to a genetic problem. Got that all put together in this article, and they queried me very aggressively, said, well, you must be sniffing glue. Everybody knows that this is the classic example of a genetically transmitted disease. And that's why I knew that was going to be a controversy, so I saved tissue from all the biopsies and from the original monkey. I saved blood, all this kind of stuff. I have slides already made. And so you can look at all that. You can do your own slides. You can do your own blood test and see if you get the same results I did. He said, no, you're fired. And so I didn't have any recourse. They fired me. I mean, I had been in the newspaper every day for 3 months, and every newspaper in the world, literally, every day for 3 months saying, what a great discovery this was, the first non-human case of cystic fibrosis. We're going to be able to build a colony of research animals, and we're going to get to do a better job of treating the disease.
Well, I've read a lot of those newspaper articles now, and the whole story is chronicled in your book, that Doctors Don't Lie. And that's, to me, an amazing book. You know, obviously the audio is still, to this day, I think, the most popular and widely distributed
9 languages
distributed health lecture in history. I mean, how can you hold somebody's attention for 2.5 hours? Yet it's riveting. And so the book expounds on that. But, you know, from my perspective, because I grew up through all that, I experienced it not like you experienced it. I was a preteen child, but you know, I watched you go through it as my parent, and you know, you experienced it. You know, I mean, you this was all you, but I experienced it from being around you. And so reading that book is interesting from my perspective, because I remember all of those things from my perspective happening. And you know, I remember 2020 being in our living room interviewing you over this. I remember the news stories on television, and I remember the controversy, but only from my perspective as a child. And so, I mean, you lived it firsthand, obviously. And so, you know, the press release that went out worldwide is republished in the book, Rare Earths Forbidden Cures. And that's a copy of the actual press release that Yerkes sent out about how positive the discovery was, and now an animal model had been found that, you know, could be used to replicate and study cystic fibrosis without having to study cystic fibrosis only in humans. And you know, I've read some of the original correspondence between you and between people at Yerkes, between third parties, where, you know, it was, you know, there was a lot of skepticism in the beginning as to whether this was even that.
That's a kind way of putting it.
well, you know, I mean, you had sent this to various medical doctors and hospitals and things, and initially, you know, they were skeptical and, you know, can't be that and that sort of thing. And then ultimately they came to the conclusion that you had already come to, that yes, it is cystic fibrosis, and it is the first case of discovered natural.
Yeah, there was no controversy on the diagnosis. They couldn't reject what you see on the slides.
Right, because it's so distinctive in the pathology, right?
Yes.
And so, but how did you narrow it down to the nutritional deficiencies you did? Because I have read that in that original correspondence, the articles, and anybody can find those articles, and it attributes to you that you attributed this to a selenium deficiency, a riboflavin, and vitamin E deficiency in the diet way back then.
And of course, I didn't point any fingers at anybody, but it turns out that the person who was in charge of that colony of couples, mothers and fathers with the 25 baby monkeys, all within a couple of weeks of age of each other, and they're all like 6 months of age, was the common thread was this individual was a behaviorist and was tinkering with the diet, adding and taking things out of the diet instead of just giving them standard mulch-free monkey pellets. They were tinkering with the diet, adding things and taking out things and so forth.
Well, and being that this colony was for NASA,
Mhm.
and again, you can see some of the original, in fact, in the documentary, The Audacity of Health, some of that original news video is in there, and I think you can see some of the background NASA logos and things, but you know, that makes sense from the standpoint that maybe they were trying to modify the behavior of these things, you know, of these monkeys for use
For space travel, that's correct. And so they were playing around with the diet, and so they have created a diet that created cystic fibrosis, what it amounts to. And they did this by adding things to the diet that were anti-selenium. The things that they added to the diet, actually, if there was selenium in the diet, it just canceled it out. Okay, so that's why the whole colony had cystic fibrosis, because they had added things to the diet that canceled out the selenium. I kind of figured all that out and talked to Dr. Gerhard Schrauzer and so forth.
Well, I think that's ultimately what led you to meeting Dr. Schrauzer,
Yes.
who was
absolutely.
the world's foremost expert even back then
in
on
selenium,
research.
absolutely. And so it turns out that selenium is an essential nutrient required by all tissues, all cells of the body. The heart is particularly requires selenium. The liver particularly requires selenium. Muscles particularly require selenium, but all tissues require it. But when you look at the heart, if you're missing selenium, you get what's called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, heart disease. Sudden heart death we see in young athletes is caused by a selenium deficiency. And then also, in addition to the cystic fibrosis, the liver and the pancreas piece, it also, white muscle disease in animals, and in humans is called muscular dystrophy. Another disease thought to be genetically transmitted, but wasn't. And why were all these diseases thought to be genetically transmitted? Well, here's why. And I didn't know about it at the time, but later on I learned about crib death, sudden death syndrome, okay, which is supposed to be mothers laying on the babies. It turns out that only 2% of the babies that died of crib death were in bed with their mothers when they died. None of them suffocated to death. It was all selenium deficiency. They all died of the heart attack that athletes died from when they're 3 months old. When they're crying, they can't say, my chest hurts, mama, take me to the emergency room. So mama would rock the baby to sleep, even though they were having chest pains from a heart attack. So anyway, to go back to this, it turns out that when you look at the tissues that require selenium, okay, let's start out with the liver. You get liver cirrhosis, fibrosis of the liver dies. And so it's an absolute essential for liver health. Same way with the pancreas cannot function without an enormous amount of selenium because of all the activities that are necessary, including making insulin that requires, and digestive enzymes requires selenium. And then the heart death, of course, in athletes, 25,000 young athletes in America each year, 25,000 under the age of 20 die from, or historically died from the deficiency of selenium. And they just say, well, they died of a heart attack. I was thinking it's due to excessive training or something like that. Turns out it was due to the deficiency of the selenium because doctors have been telling people from the Second World War, do not put selenium into baby formulas because it's toxic. Do not put selenium into multiple vitamins because it's toxic. As you had pointed out earlier, doctors were not only discounting it, but they were proactively telling people to avoid selenium because it was dangerous and toxic and poisonous.
And yet the reality is that a lot of nutrients, even water, is toxic.
Well, there's a bell-shaped curve,
right? And
yeah,
so
there's a bell-shaped curve for everything.
Selenium is one of those, like many other nutrients, one of those that you can overdo it. But you're talking about, a significant,
Yeah, we're talking about a significant overdose. Yeah, it's something the average person is not going to have happen.
Right.
So to make a long story short, going back to when all this started happening, it was during the Second World War, because we didn't have these things. We didn't have cystic fibrosis as much as we did after the Second World War. We didn't have muscular dystrophy as much as we did after the Second World War. Before the Second World War. But what happened was when mothers had to go in, they'd have a baby, and they couldn't breastfeed their babies because they had to go to the factories and make bullets and torpedoes and machine guns and airplanes. And so grandma and grandpa had to feed the babies. And so some clever guy came up with the idea of making infant formulas, Similac, Enfamil, those kind of things. And what happened was because doctors are telling people, don't put too much stuff in there, it's toxic. And so they only put 3 minerals in baby formulas originally during the Second World War. So these babies are dying of all these problems, all these nutritional deficiencies, including selenium. They were dying of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, heart disease. They were dying of cystic fibrosis, muscular dystrophy. And doctors are saying, oh, these are all genetic diseases, okay? Because they would get them just before they were born, or they were born and then 3 months later they got it and they thought they were born with it, but they developed because they were on Similac and Enfamil, which didn't have the selenium in it. And that went on for years and years and years, and nobody made the connection. Nobody made the connection, because who's going to look for a heart attack in a 3-month-old baby? They just didn't even look for it. And so it comes down to, we came up with a product 40 years ago. You would know the exact date. It came to be known as Kids Toddy. Kids Toddy, liquid multiple, which had selenium in it and all the other things. We began to add that to the baby formulas. I'm lecturing around the world, audiences of 300 people, 1,000 people. I'm on radio, I'm on TV. The newsletters are going out, newspaper, interviews, books, and things. So the word's getting out. People are adding the Kids Toddy to the baby formulas, which had only 3 minerals in it, no selenium. And the Kids Toddy had selenium in it. And suddenly now, the death rate from cystic fibrosis and muscular dystrophy started going down. And the crib death rate from 1990 by 2008 had dropped by 53%. And by 2012, it had dropped by almost 90% crib death. And April 16th, 2013, I'm just sort of breathless here with this. April 16th, 2013, a Supreme Court judge ruled that baby formula manufacturers by law must add selenium to the baby formulas. I had been trying for years to get all 60 essential minerals added to baby formulas. It was too confusing for judges and juries and things. But when I just said selenium only had to be added, they couldn't deny it, and they forced it to be added to the baby formulas, and here's why. In 1988-89, Dr. Wallach and I went to Keishan Province, China. In Keishan Province, China, there's a disease called Keishan disease, which thousands of kids, ranging from newborn to teenagers, thousands of them every month, die from this hypertrophic cardiomyopathy heart disease. It's called Keishan disease. That's because there's no selenium in the soil there. They knew to add it to the food for the animals because it cost them money when their animals died, but nobody added it to the food for kids and people in China. So Keishan disease was very interesting. So through Dr. Milan's connections, of course, Dr. Milan is a microsurgeon from China who taught and did research for 5 years at Harvard Medical School, very famous surgeon in her own right. Had connections, her family had connections there, and they got permission for me to go to Keishan Province, China, and do 2,000 autopsies on these kids who were dying of Keishan disease, this hypertrophic cardiomyopathy heart disease, a deficiency of selenium.
And there's a published study on that as well, right? And so,
well, I did 1,700 autopsies in 6 weeks' time. We had a whole team of Chinese technicians who were doing the slides and the biochemistry and everything, and Dr. Milan and I were doing the autopsies. 1,700 in 6 weeks, all kids under the age of 10. And the reason was, the whole purpose of it was, the cause of Keishan disease, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy heart disease, is a selenium deficiency, the same thing that causes cystic fibrosis, the heart deaths of athletes, muscular dystrophy, and crib death are all caused by a selenium deficiency. Okay? And so I wanted to show that even in the Chinese, and this was supposed to be a non-Asian disease, cystic fibrosis, muscular dystrophy, all just in European people, European background. In 1,700 autopsies, I wound up with 35% had cystic fibrosis, 35%, 1,700. 100% also had muscular dystrophy, but they all died of the heart attack. 200 of them under the age of 100 would have been diagnosed as sydenham death syndrome, crib death here in the United States. This is published in 3 languages. The English version, if people can look it up, the English version is the Journal of Trace Element Research, very famous, the top scientific journal for trace element research. 1,700 autopsies, and all this stuff is in there. So this is what forced this federal judge. I mean, how can you deny the results of 1,700 autopsies on kids under the age of 10? And drop dead, unimpeachable biochemistry and slides and everything. All this stuff is unimpeachable evidence. And it was published in 3 languages all over the world. And so we got the ruling. Within 3 months after the judge ruled, front page story, like Third World War, headlines in the Charlotte Observer newspaper, big newspaper in North Carolina, kind of like New York Times in New York. We don't know why, but sudden death syndrome has vanished in North Carolina. 3 months later, the newspapers in the state of Missouri said, we don't know why, but crib death has vanished in the state of Missouri.
And you show those newspaper articles.
Oh, they're in my presentation.
Sure. So I don't recall this going to a court process, but the health claim petition process did. And I do recall the FDA.
We have done many of them.
Right. Well, I mean, I've got the books right here. I'm going to show them in a minute, but you know, that I've lived that process, the health claim petition process. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, you and Dr. Schrouser and Jonathan E. Moore, mm-hmm. you know, are the pioneers that really, you know, you guys were the tip of the spear for sure. And I just gathered all the stuff, but so I lived it, you know, that whole process. I've been to the FDA. I've, you know, sat on the stage in the FDA auditorium in Maryland and given comments on the health claim petition process. There was a federal judge decision that held then Tommy Tompkins, the head of the HHS, which is the parent organization to the FDA, basically in contempt of court for not implementing the health claim petition process that Jonathan E. Moore had sued mm-hmm. on behalf of clients like us to implement the health claim petition process that Congress had told FDA under DSHEA, the Dietary Health and mm-hmm. Supplement Education Act, to implement, and FDA had resisted that and was reluctant for whatever reason, I can't imagine, to implement that. And so, you know, I can definitely, I've lived and seen the education around selenium and the importance of selenium and this growing outcry that was led by you educating people and Dr. Schrouser doing all this research to where the FDA had to, you know, ultimately agree that, you know, baby formula is lacking selenium. And I was shocked to learn this. I mean, you taught me this and Dr. Schrouser taught me this. I was shocked to learn that an essential nutrient, it has an RDA and has for decades now because of, in large part, your research and Dr. Schrouser's research to prove beyond a doubt that selenium is absolutely an essential nutrient. Absolutely. And so the FDA came to the conclusion, probably in my opinion, reluctantly, to require it to be added to baby formula. And so they did, and you're exactly right on the time frame and timeline of when that all happened.
The FDA didn't do it reluctantly. They did it under court order from a federal judge.
Yeah, I just don't remember that part being a federal judge.
April 16th, 2013.
I will have to look that up.
Mm-hmm. I almost know the exact second.
I do know that the health claim petition process was implemented under a federal judge's mm-hmm. court order. And this, so I don't know if you guys can see this, but this is book 1 of 2. And what this is, so let me see if I can show you guys this. I mean, it's thousands of pages.
Evidence,
and yeah. What this is publicly available literature, published studies on the benefits and, well, on the research of selenium. So this was submitted to the Food and Drug Administration July 10th, 2002, and the petitioner is Wellness Lifestyles, Inc. Wellness Lifestyles, Inc. is the parent company of of Youngevity, the nutritional company that goes back to December of 1996. It's now called AL Global. The name changed along the way, but it's the same company. So in 2002, you, on behalf of you, Jonathan E. Moore, submitted that health claim petition process. And there's a little interesting tidbit of history that I recall from that. There was an acting FDA commissioner at the time, and his name was Lester Crawford. And Lester Crawford was never made the official FDA commissioner. He was always the acting, he was an interim commissioner, but Jonathan E. Mord and Dr. Schrouser, they actually invited Jonathan E. Mord to bring somebody to the FDA to interact with the FDA lead scientists. And so we decided to send Dr. Schrouser. I think you were out lecturing, and Jonathan E. Mord and Dr. Schrouser were available. So Dr. Schrouser went, and Lester Crawford, I wasn't there, I heard the story, but Lester Crawford came into the meeting, and he was the acting commissioner of the FDA, and sat down and said, I have 20 minutes, I can't stay long, I just kind of want to see, make sure everything's going okay. And he wound up staying all day and listening to Dr. Schrouser go over the evidence that you and Jonathan E. Mord and Dr. Schrouser had submitted on the importance of selenium and in why it was in the public's interest to get this information out. And what the initial health claims were about was the risk reduction of certain cancers associated with selenium intake, whether through supplements or through diet, but certain levels.
And this has still been, and this is on the lowering cancers for colorectal cancer, selenium, okay, even 1/3 of the recommended daily allowance reduced the risk of colorectal cancer by 95%. That's published. It's in the icons of the federal courts. 95% reduction in risk.
And so, I guess one other tidbit of history about that whole process was Lester Crawford was a veterinarian, and so he understood
it better than most.
why this truly was so important, I think. And years later, the FDA re-reviewed the health claim petitions for selenium, and in the health claim petition process, I'm reaching for more books. That in the health claim petition process, there's only to this day a handful, since that federal judge did implement the health claim petition process. The FDA has only authorized a handful of claims, of authorized health claims. And to my knowledge, Longevity and you are the only ones to this day that have gotten authorized, submitted and received authorized health claims back from the FDA on various nutrients, starting with selenium.
That's
To my
correct.
knowledge, there's not another company like ours that has made it through the health claim petition process. Very few have even tried. I'm not aware of any, actually. And it's an arduous task. It's expensive. There's no financial benefit to you to do it. And so it truly is altruistic in getting the information out to the general public. Every company, once the FDA authorizes a health claim, if they sell a product with selenium, for example, they can use those health claims. They're not patentable, they're not copyrightable, they're that sort of thing. So, from a benefit standpoint, it's to the benefit of the general public and to the world. So in 2008, I think in 2007, late 2007, the FDA decided they would re-review the selenium health claims, and the implication was that they would revoke them pending, kind of newly found information. And it had been 2002, now it's 2007, so it's 5 years later. And again, very, very few health claim petitions had been authorized. And so you and a coalition of people and Jonathan E. Mord said, well, if you're going to re-review them, that's great, because we're going to submit new documentation as well. And so more books of additional scientific studies in 2008, February 19, 2008. And so this was submitted on behalf of the coalition to end FDA and FTC censorship. And it was on behalf of Longevity Inc., Dr. Julian Whitaker, MD, and Dirk Pearson and Sandy Shaw, submitted by Jonathan E. Mord and his amazing team. And so what ultimately came out of that was the FDA not only did not revoke the existing health claims, you and the coalition achieved several additional health claims with the additional evidence submitted. And so this has been a significant part of your life's work in educating the world on the importance of selenium. And I can tell you that, I wallow in this kind of just information gathering, obviously. And what I see even to this day is if there's a newly published article on selenium, whether it be on animals or humans, invariably there's a reference to you and your body of research, or Dr. Strauser or both. And so, it is definitely undisputed that you and Dr. Strauser, really led the way in getting the information on the importance of selenium out to the world. So, on behalf of everybody, I thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much for documenting this and keeping track of all this information. And it's just a true blessing to be put into the same category with Dr. Strauser. And the whole idea was, when you know truth, when you know something is true, and the whole world is either ignoring it or discounting it as being false, you have to keep going. You have to keep going if you're a true scientist. You cannot allow the people who are discounting the truth to kill people. Essentially, what they do is they kill people and they keep the truth from the people. So that's what motivated myself and Dr. Strauser, Jonathan Emord, and we have been a great team. And it's just the beginning, because again, if you think about it, in the last couple of years, you haven't heard much about cystic fibrosis. You haven't heard much about muscular dystrophy. And one little side issue in the muscular dystrophy, 2 years before the death of muscular dystrophy.
The death of muscular dystrophy.
The guy, telethon.
Oh, Jerry Lewis.
Jerry Lewis, yeah, the comedian. Very good. Jerry Lewis, yeah.
You're quizzing me, and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, Jerry Lewis, okay. 2 years before he died, he knew that we had found the cause, prevention, and cure for muscular dystrophy. And we gave him cases where we had actually cured them. Okay, and I have some great stories about that with the Amish through Marvin Ropp and so forth, because they had the highest rates of any community of muscular dystrophy and cystic fibrosis.
Well, I grew up with the Jerry Lewis telethons, and so I know I ribbed you and quizzed you on, come on, you're really communicating with Jerry Lewis, and you proved it to me. And so I'm as I grew up around you, and you taught me to always view things with an open mind and open heart, but to be somewhat skeptical until it's proven. Now, you're from Missouri, I'm from Missouri. It's the show me state, so I get it.
Well, here we go. And it's funny, 2 years before he died, we brought a series of medical records of kids and young people who'd been cured of muscular dystrophy. Their doctors had, by biopsies, agreed that they no longer had muscular dystrophy. And so he gave that to Jerry Lewis, and he was very excited about it. We spent a whole day with him going through these records, and he took it to the Muscular Dystrophy Association, and they fired him and stopped the telethon 2 years before he died. They fired Jerry Lewis and stopped the telethon 2 years before he died.
Oh, I remember when it ended.
Yeah,
sure.
He died.
You absolutely were talking to him. And Marvin Ropp, I know, had communicated with his assistant quite a bit. And yeah.
Well, let me tell you the story.
Okay. Well, we got like 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll do this in 3 minutes or less.
So
This will be 3 minutes or less.
Okay.
I was at a big meeting with several different colonies of the Amish that Marvin Ropp and I have been working with to deal with all these types of diseases. And this elder was there, and he's pointing to this guy by the name of Amos Wiki, who's sitting in a wheelchair, all kind of gnarled up. He says, well, you've been dealing with Amos Wiki for 2 years here, and he's still sitting in his wheelchair. He's still not walking. What do you say for yourself, Wallach? And I turned around, and I pointed to Amos. I yelled at him. I said, Amos, get up and walk. And Amos got up out of his wheelchair. He walked right up the center, out around the outside 2 or 3 times, and everybody's gasping for air because of this. And what had happened was Amos Wiki, before we had cured him of his muscular dystrophy, he had bought a wheelchair. And being Amish, he didn't want to give away his wheelchair, which he spent $200 for. So he took it with him everywhere and just sat in it and would fall asleep in it. He didn't need it to get around from muscular dystrophy because he didn't have muscular dystrophy anymore. He just sat in it. And
well, it's convenient to always have it. So, okay. So I know we talked about diseases of exotic animals last week, and I didn't have one handy. Now that we're at the longevity headquarters, I wanted to show you a copy of it. This is the book you can still find on Amazon, only used. I haven't seen a new one for sale, but These are the ones that go for like $1,000 to $21,000, depending on the quality of the copy and condition of the book. So it's definitely.
And brand new, they sell for a minimum of $25,000, and because they're getting so scarce, the ones that are still in the box, I'm sure they're going to go up to $50,000. Right now, they're $25,000 to $30,000.
And I've never even seen a new one in the box for sale. I've seen some new ones you have years ago, but that's it. And so
it represents 20,000 autopsies, 17,000.
Well, you know, and I tell people about this book when we give tours here at the office, because I lived through through you writing this book. And I think if you took another couple of minutes and explained why it was important to write a book back then, you know, you couldn't create a website. There were no computer systems to look this information up. And we talked about last time, you know, you taught the first zoo vets at many zoos, certainly at St. Louis. And so this was ultimately became a textbook because this information wasn't anywhere in particular. It wasn't collected. So you spent 20 years putting this together. And here's the thing I always tell people, I always tease you, that if you had learned to type, that instead of taking 20 years, that maybe it would have taken 10 years to write this book. Because to this day, you type, you know, like this, and you look like Schroeder over your laptop. Yeah, but, you know, spell checks probably helped a lot. But, you know, the reality is me growing up around this book being written, because life happened. You know, we go from zoo to zoo and change cities, but that
every square foot of the house was filled with articles and papers
and piles of the papers that you would type. And but if you think about it, back then, the typewriter was a manual typewriter, not even electric. There was no spell correct. You had to use little, you know, either paste or little tape. And but also for research, you couldn't go to Google or PubMed and look something up. You had to write another letter or make a phone call to say, hey, can you send me that article on?
Or go to the lab and look at the slides myself.
Right. And so you put all this together yourself.
Yes.
And you didn't have a team of assistants. I saw you do it yourself. And, you know, so to take 20 years to accumulate all this information, collate it, put it into never ending, to put it into a finished form is just to this day one of the most amazing examples of fortitude and pushing through whatever life throws at you that I personally rely on. And so to this day, and so you know, from your perspective, you might just, you know, add to what even gave you the idea to put this together back then? Because today, you know, you go ahead and build a website, or you build a computer program, or you build an app. But back then,
Steve, back then where people got information was from reference books. You had to go to the library and it was a reference book. And you have to appreciate that all of the information on nutritional deficiencies were in animals, and 50 white rats, or maybe 10 chickens or something like that. And to do a study where there was 17,000 autopsies on over 454 species, and it showed that there's no genetic diseases, there's no genetically transmitted birth defects, and basically none of this was known, and everybody else out there dealing with human beings is operating on false information, in some cases no information, which is better than false information, okay? And so I had to get it into a book, and when I was talking to Dr. Schrauzer about this, he says, well, the company we had to go to is W.B. Saunders, which was the textbook, medical textbook.
Yeah, they were huge out of Pennsylvania.
And they were the ones, they were the world, they did textbooks in every language of the world, in every country in the world. And we submitted the raw materials to them, and they said, yes, we'll do it. And they recognized the value of it, because there was nothing. You had to go to 100 libraries and look at 10,000 articles to get the same information you could get in that one book. And so this is a process, and I had to go there and work with them and look over their shoulders, because they did have this sort of early computers and things back then. And it was a process. It was a process. And we had a question, just like this Keyshawn disease. It answered the question for 3 diseases: cystic fibrosis, muscular dystrophy, crib death, by doing 1,700 autopsies on kids under the age of 10.
Well, I think that's something that makes your background and your research so unique. because you actually did the research.
Yes.
You actually did the original research. You didn't go to a website and read about it. You actually did it. You actually observed it. You actually did this for yourself.
Elbow deep in blood and guts, literally.
For decades.
Mm-hmm.
And so today, much of what research consists of is reading. And while that's important, there is no replacement, and I was taught this by you and Dr. Schrouser, there is no replacement for original research. That is doing it yourself and experiencing it firsthand. And that's why Dr. Schrouser was so interested in what you had discovered at your case, because you discovered it. You didn't read about it, you found it.
Yeah, and he was a blessing. He took me under his wing.
Dr. Schrouser was amazing.
Yeah, he was a real blessing. He took me under his wing and taught me more about details of research, and he taught me more and more about selenium. And we went many places and talked to many hospitals and many pathology departments and many medical schools. And he had such a unique and great reputation that people listened to me because he was mentoring me. And so his credibility kind of gave me access. And so it was really a great relationship.
Well, and Dr. Schrouser was the head of chemistry and biochemistry right here in San Diego at UCSD, where Zachary, your grandson, now is going to school. And Dr. Milan was a researcher there. Dr. Dubois, who was on our scientific advisory board, was a researcher there with Dr. Schrouser. Dr. Schrouser was the chairman because of your relationship with him and his experience and his knowledge. I was the chairman of the scientific advisory board of Longevity for 15, 17, 18 years, something like that. And so, we as a company and as a community have been blessed by not only your research, which is amazing, but your relationships like that with Dr. Schrouser that really brings such unique levels of experience and research to Longevity.
So I don't know how much time we have left.
I think we're going to wrap it up here pretty quick, but if you have another 1 minute story or something.
Okay. Have another 1 minute story.
You don't have to.
No, there's so many important things. I think right now, because of coronavirus, I do have something that I think that nobody knows. The coronavirus thing actually started 300 years ago. Celiac disease was a huge problem in Italy 300 years ago. It's written up, it's documented. They clinically knew about it, and they knew it caused skin problems, they knew it caused respiratory problems. And when people would die, they would do autopsies on them, physicians back then, and they would see all the problems with their intestines and everything. And 300 years ago, the most common side effect, 300 years ago, published, the most common side effect of celiac disease was osteoporosis that they could recognize. I'm sure there was more, but osteoporosis was the one that they all recorded. Okay? Well, osteoporosis is more than just bone fractures and losing minerals out of your bones when you're older. The bone marrow cavity fills up with scar tissue and displaces and squeezes the stem cells that make white blood cells, lymphocytes, neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils, which are the cavalry. When the viruses, including coronavirus, get into your bloodstream, they get into a wound, your body sends out signals, and your bone marrow releases the white blood cells and goes and they eat and kill the viruses. And that's why we had 33 babies born 2 days ago to mothers that had coronavirus. The babies were born with coronavirus, but they only had minor cold symptoms, or fever was like 1 degree. Instead of 98.6, it was 99. Had no symptoms other than that. And so they're a couple of days old now, they're doing great. And they will do great until they're in their 20s and 30s. If they do exactly as their mothers did, like in Italy, they'll eat pasta, okay, spaghetti and noodles and bread and so forth. And then they start getting more serious problems because now their intestines are like 70% damaged from the gluten. Now they have celiac disease. And when you get damage like that, you cannot absorb the nutrients necessary for your bone marrow to make healthy white blood cells so they can go kill the virus. That's why people don't get the killing type of coronavirus results until they're in their 50s and 60s, because now 95% of their intestines are totally messed up from eating gluten every day in the Italian diet. And this happened over and over and over for 300 years. Every time they have a plague, and literally millions of people died in Europe and all over the world from the plagues, it was because they didn't have enough ability to absorb the nutrition for their white blood cells to be made in their bone marrow to then go and kill the viruses. Now, prior to nutritional supplements, and people say, well, my grandmother lived to be 112 and she didn't take any supplements. Well, yes, she did. When she had cravings, she went out in the backyard and ate dirt. If she lived in an area that had selenium in the soil, she got selenium. Or she would eat wood ashes. Well, sometimes trees would grow in places where there was selenium in the soil and suck up selenium. You burn through it, and the selenium was in the wood ashes. And grandma would eat the wood ashes. She did supplement, she just didn't know it. They would put the wood ashes in the garden. I put wood ashes in the garden. We didn't have electricity until I was 9. We put wood ashes there twice, 3 times a day.
Oh, and it was a very popular thing after World War II. It was called victory gardens, right?
Yeah.
And so people would grow their own food even in their small backyards.
Yep.
And they would use wood ash to
fertilize it.
Essentially fertilize
Yep.
the soil.
But let's say you had wood ashes. It had 12 minerals in it, 20 minerals in it, 40 minerals in it. That's what you were getting. And that's why some people live to be 112, not because they had good genetics, but because they're getting minerals,
So they're getting
including
nutrition.
they're getting good nutrition. And so there are people alive today, and I'm quoting a professor of human physiology out of the medical school in London. And he said 2 years ago in a big paper, there's 7 things we can do to maximize our lifespan, one of which is getting rid of the bad stuff, which is gluten, which I've been saying for 50 years. Get rid of gluten, maximize absorption of nutrition, and your defense system will take care of you. Your defense, I'm 80 years old. I haven't been sick, and you know me, I haven't been sick from an infectious disease. I haven't even had a cold. I don't have diabetes, I don't have arthritis. I've had injuries, okay, which I'm recovering from, but I don't have any sicknesses, and I'm 80 years old. Everybody can be 100, 200. And of course, James Hilton wrote the book Lost Horizon and made a movie about it because there was a Chinese guy who's 256 years of age. The New York Times sent James Hilton, an investigative reporter, to study him. He studied him for a year and said, this guy's really 256. He died at 263.
So we went over this on this already, and I'm over time.
Okay.
So what we're going to do is we may do another one of these in the future, and maybe we can talk all about celiac disease, for instance, or gluten, or the health claim petition process. A lot we can talk about. But what I want to do now, because I'm over time, is you're wearing the Healthy Body Challenge shirt that's coming up. So people love getting these Healthy Body Challenge shirts, and this is the brand new one. So in April kickoff, we're going to kick off the next Healthy Body Challenge, and so that's coming up. So watch for the April monthly kickoff call and video coming up.
That's next month.
Monday, I think.
Alex, 9 a.m. stage.
Sean and Alex, 9 a.m. this page, Monday. All right. So with that, I'm going to end this. Thank you, Dr. Wallach, Dad, for being on this Facebook Live. And I know everybody really appreciates always seeing you and all your wealth of knowledge. Thank you all for taking a little time out of your day. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Be safe, be
God
well.
bless America.
Absolutely.